save the world. This is a quote from perhaps one of my favorite novels by the 19th century Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, and this book is called The Idiot. Now, to explain why this one line within this novel had such a profound impact on me, as well as every single other person who has read it and who has had a conversation about it with me, I should probably delve into the life story of Dostoevsky himself, as well as the genesis of this quote. Dostoevsky was born in 1821 within Moscow, Russia. From a young age, his life was marred by very unusual suffering. At the age of 9, one of his best childhood friends was assaulted and then later murdered. At the age of 15, his mother, who he loved very dearly, had tuberculosis and unfortunately died because of the disease. A few years later, when Dostoevsky was studying military engineering in college, his father died of unknown causes as well. In an attempt to find some sort of solace within life, within all of this trauma, Dostoevsky started writing. But unfortunately, his earlier works were rejected and heavily shunned by the literary circles at that time. So instead, he resorted to going to the secret meetings of a utopian socialist group, in which he was able to talk about his ideas, in which he was able to try to find some sort of hope for the future. But unfortunately, this utopian socialist group and all the secret meetings they had was eventually discovered by the government, who subsequently arrested all the members, including Dostoevsky, and sentenced them, every single one of them, to death by firing squad. Fortunately, this event turned out to be just a mock execution. However, this event continued to haunt Dostoevsky for the rest of his life as he suffered with the consequences of trauma. The thing is, Dostoevsky was later sent to a Siberian labor camp instead of actually facing death. But when he returned years later to his family, he became a profoundly different person, which was showcased through his later writing. Instead of the earlier optimism or romanticism for life, his writing became more sinister. It contained a lot of his trauma from within the Siberian labor camps and the first-hand things that he witnessed that were so terrible and caused him so much trauma. People today who read the works from Dostoevsky at that time would even characterize this work as incredibly cynical and sinister. Yet, in 1869, Dostoevsky, within one of his probably most personal books, The Idiot, wrote that beauty will save the world. These words are attributed to the story's main hero, Prince Myshkin. Now, Prince Myshkin is a genuinely kind and innocent soul who traverses a world filled with suffering, filled with greed, and filled with nihilism. Like Dostoevsky himself, because this book is perhaps maybe even autobiographical to a certain extent, Prince Myshkin has epilepsy. He is a kind soul. His goodness is supposed to represent the goodness of the world. Yet by the end of the novel, Prince Myshkin succumbs to all of the insanity that eventually led him to a very terrible demise. So beauty will save the world. How can that possibly be true, especially for someone like Prince Myshkin? How can Dostoevsky, a man who has suffered so much, has gone through so much trauma and grief, possibly say that beauty of all things can save the world? This question, which I ask right now, and you might also be thinking about right now, was once echoed by the famous author Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his Nobel Prize-winning speech. He, like Dostoevsky, had gone through these labor camps within Russia and knew firsthand how terrible the circumstances were. And therefore, he could not possibly comprehend how Dostoevsky could say such a thing, like beauty will save the world. He said during the speech, and I quote, "How can it be possible? What sort of statement is that, right? When in bloodthirsty history did beauty ever save anyone from anything? Ennobled, uplifted, yes, but whom has it actually saved?" Now, this sentiment expressed by Solzhenitsyn continued to echo in my mind through the important moments in my life. Exactly, there are two moments, transformative events, that I feel like changed my outlook on the world, and more importantly, led me to some sort of answer to Dostoevsky's original claim that beauty will save the world. Now, the first of these personal anecdotes and these transformative events was when I was 13 years old towards the end of 2019 when I was crossing the border between Israel and the West Bank. Now, I was on a bus, and that bus was full of people from all walks of life. You have your average businessman going on their business trips for better opportunities across the border in Israel, and you have your school children who had so many hopes and dreams that they wanted to achieve in a better education across the border. You also had the bus driver who was just happy to have that casual conversation with the people sitting in the back. Amongst all of those people on that bus that day, there was one person who really stood out to me, and that was a little girl. She looked around my age, maybe 12, maybe 13, and she was blasting very loud music in the background, which I personally resonated with. But in this case, when we got on the bus, she looked up and she smiled. I waved back. Now, this might seem like a very, very mundane moment, but at that moment, two strangers, albeit of similar age, who spoke different languages and seemingly had nothing in common, created a moment that really transcended any artificial barriers. We were all very, very different people on that bus. But the thing that unites us is the fact that we are all civilians. We are all people with something going for us, and we all have hopes and dreams that we hope to fulfill. Those are the characteristics that apply to the people on that bus that day, and perhaps also apply to you in the audience as well. However, this moment really did not last long. When we approached the checkpoints, reality knocked on our door and a clear line was drawn. I could only watch on solemnly as all of the civilians on the bus, including that little girl, were paraded off of the bus by armed soldiers like criminals in chains to be further interrogated. Some might be allowed to cross the border, but most of them weren't. Most of them were denied the opportunities across the border. They were denied opportunities to see their family members and friends they haven't seen in years. This was a situation that was so incredibly terrible and really changed my outlook at that moment. It was such a transformative moment in my life. This memory was abruptly brought up recently when I read the recent news headlines on the conflict within Israel and Palestine. With the increased crackdowns, the bombings, the innocent lives that are being lost minute by minute. I really, really hope that little girl is okay. But perhaps more than that, I wonder what stories she could have told if she was given those educational opportunities across the border. What inspirational stories she could have told me if we were able to have a conversation in the first place. But unfortunately, just like Prince Michigan, she was denied those bright opportunities and her aspirations were stopped because of the sinister world she lives in, because of circumstances completely out of her control. Now, the second transformative event that I encountered happened this summer when I was in Russia. Now, I witnessed injustices not very, very similar to the one in Palestine as well. And I also encountered people who got some really similar struggles. There was a girl, for example, who was a recent high school graduate who talked about wanting to go study abroad in other countries so she could finally receive an education that did not face the censorship of a country. The other girl also talked about her dreams about traveling outside of Russia so she could talk to people with very, very different perspectives and broaden her mindset. Importantly, they had really beautiful dreams and aspirations, and at the same time, they also expressed their anger at the current war situation and their wish for peace and an end to the conflict. I came to better understand where they were coming from and why they said this a few days later when I saw lines of soldiers who really looked not that much older than me, perhaps 17, 18, 19, waiting in line to be sent to the front lines of war. These are brothers, these are sons, these are friends, these are people with stories that they need to tell. I wonder what unique stories they could tell us if they were given the opportunities. I wonder what unique stories the people across the border in Ukraine could tell if they were given the opportunities. But I guess more than that, I wonder if they would be able to live long enough to tell those stories in the first place. Now, all of these might seem incredibly pessimistic, but I think that the conclusions I was able to draw after reflecting on these stories is really able to show the opposite. Now, going back to Dostoevsky and his writing in The Idiot, at the end of the novel, Prince Michigan meets a very chilling fate. However, we should not overlook that throughout the course of his life and throughout the course of the novel, the love he showed, the optimism he showed, and the humility he showed. These were important things, and Michigan, like Dostoevsky, transformed his sufferings into lessons. In this, we see the first hints from what Dostoevsky could have meant when he claimed that beauty would save the world. Now, you in the audience, think of something beautiful in your life. Perhaps it is a painting or a song you like listening to, maybe a beautiful act of kindness you saw over the weekend, or even a special person in your life who you love dearly. When we see something beautiful, we are inspired. The feeling of wonder and awe when you see something beautiful simply cannot be described by words or by logic. There is beauty in hope, faith, humility, love, and even death. To an extent, there is beauty in everything. This brief moment of connection I had on that bus in Palestine that day showcased that even though there was a lot of injustices surrounding us, we were still able to create those very beautiful moments through a simple interaction like waving and smiling. Through those conversations with the girls in Russia, I was able to realize that they could continue to have their dreams and aspirations despite the injustices that were completely out of their control. Perhaps beyond the beauty of life itself, Dostoevsky was really referring to the beauty of overcoming. Overcoming in the sense that you refuse to let injustices define you and your life. Overcoming in the sense that you want to make the future a better place for future generations through maintaining that sort of optimism and hope. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn expresses later in his speech, in this case, Dostoevsky's remark that beauty will save the world was not just a careless phrase, but perhaps a prophecy. Dostoevsky transformed his grief into blessings, his experiences into stories, and his life and death into inspiration for us all. At our core, we are all interconnected by our desire to see the beauty of life. Beauty in itself may not save the world, but it might just be a gateway to allow us to safeguard the types of optimism and the types of hope so we can change the world. Because in order for us to want to change the world, we have to realize the beauty in life itself in the first place. So next time, attempt to make an active effort to recognize these beautiful little moments within your life. Maybe have a conversation with a stranger. You might just be surprised by how much you have in common. You might just be surprised by how a simple conversation can necessarily hedge against the injustices of the world that seek to silence our desire to have hope and have optimism. You are the catalyst to your own journey to realize this type of beauty in the world. And just like Dostoevsky, I believe that you have the capacity to do so. Thank you.